When her wealthy cousins inherited millions, she was left with a $10 barn and a letter that would change everything. It was a story about what we inherit and how the things that look like burdens are sometimes the only gifts that matter. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button because we're going to talk about it. The air on my 18th birthday tasted like institutional bleach and the stale promise of freedom. For 2 years, that building had been my world. A maze of beige hallways, supervised meals, and the low, constant hum of fluorescent lights. 2 years of waiting for a calendar page to turn. When it finally did, it felt less like a celebration and more like an eviction. A social worker named Carol, a woman with tired eyes and a kind but professional smile, handed me a single cardboard box. It contained everything I owned. 3 changes of clothes, a worn paperback copy of a book I no longer remembered reading, and a photograph of a mother I barely knew. "Happy birthday, Alara," she said, the words practiced, offered to dozens of kids just like me. The world's waiting. The world, as it turned out, was a bus station bench under a sky the color of dishwater. I had a final check from the state for $250, a list of shelters, and the hollow feeling of being completely, terrifyingly untethered. I was an adult. The word felt like a badly fitting coat. My phone, a cheap prepaid model, buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. In my life, unknown numbers were usually wrong numbers or bad news. But something made me answer. "Is this Alara Vance?" a man's voice asked. It was dry, like old paper. "Who's asking?" I clutched the box on my lap, my knuckles white. "My name is Arthur Davies. I'm an attorney. I was the executor of your grandfather's estate." My grandfather. The name was a ghost story. A man I'd met only a handful of times as a small child before my mother got sick. He was a wealthy man, a man of property and influence, who had, for reasons I never understood, kept his distance after she passed. His world of sprawling estates and family trusts was as alien to me as the surface of the moon. "His estate?" I repeated, the words tasting strange. "He passed away?" "I'm afraid so. 3 months ago," Mr. Davies said. "I've been trying to locate you. The system, well, it's not always efficient. The reading of the will took place last month." A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. The will. I imagined my cousins, Marcus and Celia, decked out in designer mourning clothes, collecting their inheritance. They had grown up in his world, surrounded by his wealth. I had grown up in mine, surrounded by the state. "Look, I don't know why you're calling me," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "I wasn't part of his life. I don't expect anything." There was a pause, filled with the rustle of papers. "That's not entirely accurate, Ms. Vance. Your grandfather, Alistair Vance, did make a provision for you. It's unconventional." I waited, the noise of the bus station fading into a dull roar. Unconventional. That could mean anything. "Your cousins, Marcus and Celia, inherited the bulk of the estate. The properties, the investment portfolios, the primary residence. It's a substantial sum." He cleared his throat. "For you, your grandfather left a single asset. A piece of property in a town called Northwood. It's about a 4-hour bus ride from where you are." A flicker of something. Not hope, but a less defined, less dangerous cousin of hope stirred in my chest. Property. A piece of land. A home. "What kind of property?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's listed on the deed as barn and surrounding 2 acres, Mr. Davies said. "Just the barn. The main farmhouse on the adjacent lot went to your cousin Marcus." He paused again, and this time it felt heavy, apologetic. "There is a condition. Per the terms of the will, The property is to be sold to you for the sum of $10. You have 30 days from your 18th birthday to claim it and pay the fee. If you fail to do so, the property reverts to the main estate, to be absorbed by your cousins. A barn. Not a house. A barn. And I had to buy it. The absurdity of it was a slap in the face. My wealthy grandfather, a man who could have given me a real start, a real chance, had left me a crumbling farm building for the price of a cheap lunch. It was an insult gift-wrapped in legal jargon. A final, posthumous message that I was, and always would be, the outcast. The charity case. A barn, I said, the words hollow. Yes, Mr. Davies confirmed. I have the paperwork here. And a key. And something else he left for you. A personal item. I can meet you if you'd like, to finalize the transfer should you choose to accept. My $250 wouldn't last a week. The shelters were a last resort, a step back into a system I had just escaped. The barn, as insulting as it was something. It was a roof. It was mine, if I wanted it. Where are you? I asked, my decision made not out of want, but out of a complete and utter lack of alternatives. He gave me the address of a small coffee shop a few blocks away. I hoisted my box, the flimsy cardboard digging into my arms, and walked out of the bus station. The gray sky seemed to press down on me, heavy with the weight of a future I couldn't yet see. The world was waiting, Carol had said. I just hadn't realized it would be waiting in a rundown barn in a town I'd never heard of. Mr. Davies was older than he sounded, with thin white hair and a suit that had seen better decades. He sat in a corner booth, a worn leather briefcase on the seat beside him. He stood when I approached, his expression one of professional sympathy. He looked at the box in my arms and then at my face, and I saw a flicker of something human behind the lawyerly demeanor. Miss Vance, Ilara, thank you for coming, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I placed my box on the floor and slid into the booth. The vinyl was cracked and cold. He ordered me a hot chocolate without asking, a small kindness that almost made me cry. We sat in silence until it arrived, a steaming mug that I wrapped my cold hands around. Let's get to it, shall we? He said, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a thick manila folder. This is a copy of the relevant section of your grandfather's will. It's as I stated on the phone. The property, assessor's parcel number 7B-44, consisting of 1 barn and 2 acres of land, is bequeathed to you under the condition of a $10 purchase. He slid a pen and a document across the table. This is the transfer of deed. Your signature here and here. I stared at the lines. It felt surreal. Signing away 10 of my precious $250 for a building I'd never seen. A building that was likely home to rats and spiders and nothing more. Why? I asked, my voice quiet. Why would he do this? It feels cruel. Mr. Davies looked down at his hands, then back at me. I was Alistair's lawyer for over 30 years. He was a complicated man, not an easy one. He loved your mother very much, but he and your father, they did not see eye to eye. When your mother passed and your father couldn't cope, Alistair became distant. I think he was a man ruled by a great deal of pride, and perhaps a great deal of regret. He sighed, a long, weary sound. Your cousins were not pleased. They see the entire estate as their birthright. They contested this part of the will, small as it is. They argued you were a stranger, that Alistair was not of sound mind. The judge disagreed. That parcel of land, it's technically separate from the main farm. Alistair bought it years ago under a different holding company. It was important to him that it remained distinct. That explained the $10 fee. It wasn't a gift. It was a sale. A legal maneuver to keep it out of the larger estate battle. It made the whole thing feel even colder, more calculated. So they get millions, and I get a project that will probably fall down in the next storm, I said. Perhaps, Mr. Davies said, his gaze steady. Or perhaps not. Alistair was never a man to do things without reason, even when those reasons were opaque to the rest of us. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out 2 more items. The first was a large, old-fashioned iron key, heavy and ornate. It was attached to a simple brass tag stamped with the numbers 7B-44. The second was a sealed, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in a spidery, elegant script that I instinctively knew was my grandfather's. "He left this for you as well," Mr. Davies said, sliding the envelope and the key across the table. "He instructed me to give it to you only after you signed the deed. He said to read it when you arrived at the property, not before." My hand trembled as I picked up the letter. It felt heavy, filled with more than just paper. It was filled with 30 years of silence, of questions I'd never been able to ask. I took a deep breath, picked up the pen, and signed the papers. I pushed a $10 bill across the table, a bill that felt like it was worth 1,000. Mr. Davies neatly folded it and placed it in an evidence envelope. "It's done," he said, his voice soft. "The property is now legally yours, Alara. For better or for worse." He handed me a receipt and a copy of the deed. "The bus to Northwood leaves from gate 14 in 1 hour. It's the last one of the day." He stood to leave, pausing for a moment. "One more thing. Your cousin Marcus's lawyer has been in contact. They're aware you have 30 days. They've already made an offer. $10,000 for you to sign the property back over to them. They say it's to consolidate the family holdings. The offer is on the table for 48 hours. $10,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering and impossible. It was more money than I had ever seen. It was a new start. An apartment, new clothes, a security deposit, food. It was a way out. It was freedom. All I had to do was give up a dilapidated barn I'd never seen. The smart choice, the logical choice, was to take the money and run, never look back. "Why do they want it so badly?" I asked. "If it's just an old barn." Mr. Davies shrugged, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. "Marcus is a developer. He has plans for that entire valley. That parcel, small as it is, apparently sits right in the middle of his proposed access road. Without it, his project is significantly more complicated, more expensive." So that was it. Not sentiment, just business. My grandfather's final, strange gift was nothing more than a bargaining chip, a nuisance property my cousins wanted to sweep away. "Tell them I'll think about it," I said. Mr. Davies nodded. "Good luck, Ilara," he said, and then he was gone, leaving me alone with my hot chocolate, a key to a barn, and a letter from a dead man. The $10,000 offer felt like a test. My grandfather had left me a puzzle, and my cousins had just handed me an easy, tempting, and almost certainly wrong answer. I clutched the letter in my hand. The answers weren't with my cousins or their lawyers. They were in Northwood. The bus ride to Northwood was a journey through a landscape of forgetting. The city's dense, angry skyline slowly dissolved into sprawling suburbs, which then frayed at the edges into strip malls and gas stations, and finally gave way to wide, empty stretches of farmland. The world outside the grimy window turned from shades of gray to muted greens and browns. It was late autumn, and the trees were skeletal, their bare branches clawing at the overcast sky. The fields lay fallow, a patchwork of dirt and dried stubble. I sat with my box on the seat next to me, a silent companion holding the sum total of my life. The iron key was heavy in my pocket, a cold, solid weight against my leg. The letter was tucked safely inside my jacket, its sharp corners a constant reminder of the mystery I was hurtling toward. With every mile that passed, the city's grip on me loosened. The constant noise, the feeling of being watched by a million indifferent strangers, the oppressive weight of concrete and steel, it all began to recede, replaced by a different kind of feeling. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was a vast, unnerving emptiness. Out here, the silence was so loud it hummed. I thought about the $10,000. The number played over and over in my mind. I could get a small apartment, find a job, maybe even enroll in community college. I could build a normal life, a life free from the shadows of the system, free from the ghost of a family that never wanted me. It was the sensible path, the safe path. But my grandfather's words, as relayed by Mr. Davies, echoed in my head. He was never a man to do things without reason. Was this his reason? To hand me a piece of leverage to pry a little cash from the rich side of the family. It seemed too simple, too cynical. And the letter. Why insist I read it at the property? It felt like he had set a stage and was demanding I stand on it before the play could begin. The bus wheezed to a stop in what I assumed was the center of Northwood. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a few buildings clinging to it for dear life. A general store with a rusted tin roof, a post office, a gas station with a single pump, and a small diner with a flickering neon sign that read, "Eat." A handful of houses were scattered down a side road. That was it. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away with a hydraulic sigh, leaving me in a cloud of diesel fumes and a profound silence broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pines that bordered the road. I stood there for a long moment, my box feeling heavier than ever. This was it, the start of my new life. It felt more like the end of the world. I walked into the general store. A bell above the door chimed a cheerful, out-of-place welcome. The air inside smelled of sawdust, coffee, and damp wool. An old man, with a face like a road map, sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up at me over his glasses. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I'm looking for parcel 7B-44, I said, the legal term feeling ridiculous on my tongue. "The old Vance property." His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of recognition. "Alistair's place. Haven't seen anyone out there in years, not since he stopped coming up. You family?" "Granddaughter," I said. The word felt like a lie. He grunted, folding his newspaper with deliberate slowness. "Well, the main house is up on the ridge, but you said 7B-44. That's the old barn down in the hollow. Follow this road east for about a mile. You'll see a dirt track on your left, just past the old stone wall. Can't miss it. The barn's the only thing down there." He paused, his gaze assessing me, my worn-out clothes, the box. "Gonna be dark soon. You got a place to stay?" "The barn, I guess," I said. He shook his head slowly. "No power out there, kid. No water. Hasn't been for 20 years. Place is probably half fallen in." The last dregs of my fragile hope began to drain away. Of course it was a ruin. What else could it be? The $10,000 offer seemed less like a temptation now, and more like a lifeline. "Thanks," I mumbled, turning to leave. "Hold on," he said. He reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy-duty flashlight and a small propane lantern. "You take these. Pay me back when you can. And you come back here tomorrow morning. Martha at the diner makes a decent breakfast. You look like you could use one." I was so taken aback by the unexpected kindness that I couldn't speak for a moment. "Thank you," I finally managed to say. "I'm Alara." "Frank," he said with a nod. "Now get going before you lose the light." The walk was cold. The wind had picked up, and it cut right through my thin jacket. The dirt track was just as Frank had described it. a barely there path overgrown with weeds, flanked by a crumbling stone wall. I pushed my way through the tangled branches, the silence of the woods pressing in on me, and then I saw it. It wasn't half fallen in. It stood in a clearing, a massive structure of weathered gray wood and a dark, rust-streaked metal roof. It was bigger than I had imagined, a cathedral of a barn, with a high, gabled peak and a large hayloft door staring down at me like a single, blind eye. It was old, ancient even. The wood was silvered with age, and patches of moss grew in the shaded spots. But it was standing. It was solid. The roofline was straight, the walls unbowed. It wasn't a ruin. It was a survivor. A sense of awe, mingled with a deep and profound sense of dread, washed over me. This was mine. This strange, silent giant in the middle of nowhere. I walked to the main doors. They were huge, at least 12 feet high, and secured with a thick, rusted chain and a heavy-duty padlock. I fumbled in my pocket for the key. It slid into the lock with a satisfying click. The lock was new, or at least newer than everything else. It opened easily. I unwound the chain, the heavy links cold and gritty in my hands, and pulled on one of the doors. It groaned in protest, the sound echoing in the quiet clearing. With a final, shuddering heave, it swung inward, opening a slice of profound darkness. The air that rolled out smelled of old hay, damp earth, and time itself. I set my box down on the threshold, took out the flashlight Frank had given me, and stepped inside. The beam of the flashlight cut a nervous, trembling path through the cavernous darkness. The inside of the barn was even larger than it seemed from the outside. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, a complex web of massive, hand-hewn beams and rafters that disappeared into the gloom above. Dust motes, thick as insects, danced in the cone of light. The floor was packed earth, surprisingly level and clear, swept clean of the debris I had expected. To my left, a set of stalls, their wooden doors hanging slightly askew, lined the wall. To my right, a collection of old farm equipment huddled under a thick blanket of dust, a plow, a seed drill, things whose names and purposes I could only guess at. They looked like sleeping iron beasts from another century. Straight ahead, a sturdy-looking wooden staircase led up to the hayloft. Everything was covered in a layer of gray, but it wasn't the chaos of neglect I had braced myself for. It was the ordered stillness of a place that had been deliberately left. It felt less like an abandoned building and more like a museum exhibit waiting for the lights to be turned on. I walked deeper inside, my footsteps muffled by the soft earth. The air was cold, but it was a still cold, free from the biting wind outside. The barn held a strange silence, a quiet so deep it felt protective. I ran my hand along one of the main support beams. The wood was cool and smooth, polished by time. It felt solid, rooted in the earth. This place had stood for 100 years. It would stand for 100 more. I started to feel a strange sense of ownership, a feeling so foreign it was almost frightening. This wasn't just a barn, it was a fortress, it was a legacy. An odd one, to be sure, but it was real. It was wood and iron and earth. It was mine. My thoughts drifted back to my cousins, Marcus and Celia. I pictured them in their pristine, inherited mansion, surrounded by polished silver and expensive art. They would never understand this place. To them, it was just an obstacle, a worthless relic on a valuable piece of land. They wouldn't see the craftsmanship in the beams, the history in the worn-out tools, the quiet dignity of a structure that had outlasted the men who built it. My grandfather had known them, had known their world. So why give this to me? Was it a test of character? A way to see if I valued something other than money? Or was there something more to it? My flashlight beam caught something on a workbench tucked away in a corner. It was a small, metal lockbox, the kind you'd keep cash or important papers in. It was painted a dull army green, and it was locked. Next to it was a crowbar. My heart started to beat a little faster. This felt deliberate. But before I could investigate, I remembered the letter. Read it when you arrived at the property. I was here. I sat down on an overturned wooden crate, the circle of my flashlight beam creating a small island of light in the vast darkness. I took the envelope out of my jacket. My hands were shaking now, not from the cold, but from anticipation. This was it. The moment of truth. 30 years of silence were about to be broken. I carefully tore open the seal. Inside was a single, folded sheet of thick, expensive-looking paper. I unfolded it. The same elegant, spidery script covered the page. And as I began to read, the entire world, the barn, my cousins, the $10,000, shifted on its axis. "My dearest Ilara," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found your way here. I hope you have. I have gambled the last part of my life on the hope that you would. I owe you an explanation. More than that, I owe you the truth. I am sorry that it must come to you in a letter from a man you barely knew. But the truth was a dangerous thing to speak aloud in our family. Let me start by saying this. I did not abandon you. In my own flawed, cowardly way, I have spent the last 12 years trying to protect you. To understand that, you must understand the nature of the Vance family fortune. It was not built on clever investments or hard work, as the stories go. It was built on a foundation of crime. My father, your great-grandfather, was a man who laundered money for people you would not want to know. He was very good at it. He built an empire, and he wrapped it in layers of legitimate businesses, real estate, shipping, agriculture. But at its core, the money was dirty, and it came with obligations. It came with partners who did not forgive debts or mistakes. I inherited that empire and its obligations. For years, I tried to untangle it, to clean it, to make it something my daughter, your mother, could be proud of. I failed. The rot was too deep. When your mother met your father, a good man from outside our world, I was happy for her. I hoped she could escape. But the family, the business, it has a gravity you cannot imagine. When your mother died and your father fell apart, I was faced with a terrible choice. Your cousins, Marcus and Celia, were already being groomed by the partners to take over. They embraced it. They have none of my reservations. They see only the power and the money. If I had brought you into the family estate, raised you as my own, I would have been painting a target on your back. You would have become another asset, another piece on their chessboard. They would have used you, controlled you, and eventually consumed you. The Vance family has a way of destroying anything good it touches. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I let the state take you. I let you think I had forgotten you. It was a cruel act, and it has haunted me every day since. But I knew that in the system, you would be anonymous. You would be safe from them. You would be free, in a way no Vance has been for generations. It was a terrible, imperfect protection, but it was the only one I could offer. Which brings us to this barn. This piece of land is the only clean thing I ever owned. I bought it decades ago, through a shell corporation, with money I had earned legitimately before I inherited the family business. It is off the books. It does not officially exist in the Vance Empire. It is invisible to them and their partners. Your cousins want it because it complicates a land deal they are planning with a development company that is, of course, another front for their partner's money. They think it's just a nuisance. They have no idea what it really is. This barn, Ilara, is an escape hatch. Inside the green lockbox on the workbench, you will find a key. Not for the box itself. I trust you can find a way into that. The key is for a locker at the bus station in the city. Inside that locker is a briefcase. Inside the briefcase, you will find two things: $50,000 in cash and a ledger. The cash is yours. It is clean money from the same source as this barn. It is enough for you to disappear, to start a new life, anywhere you want, to change your name, go to school, be anyone you want to be. This is the first choice I am giving you. You can take the money and walk away from all of this. I will not blame you if you do. The ledger is the second choice. It is my life's work. For 20 years, I secretly documented everything. Every transaction, every name, every dirty deal. It is the proof that can bring down the entire Vance organization and their partners. It is a weapon. If you give that ledger to the authorities, you will unleash a storm. It will be dangerous. My family will not go down without a fight. They will come after you. But you will also be doing what I never had the courage to do. You will be cleaning the slate. You will be freeing yourself and the Vance name from the poison that has infected it for a century. The choice is yours: freedom through anonymity or freedom through justice. Neither path is easy. I am sorry, my dear girl. I am sorry for the life you have had. I am sorry I was not the grandfather you deserved. I only hope that with this, my final act, I have given you something of real value. Not money, not property, but a choice. The one thing they never would have given you. Whatever you decide, know that I loved your mother, and I loved you. Your grandfather, Alistair. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. The words swam before my eyes, blurring and sharpening, rearranging my entire world. The cold, distant grandfather who had abandoned me was gone. In his place was a man trapped in a gilded cage, a man who had made a terrible, heartbreaking choice to save me. The insult of the $10 barn was not an insult at all. It was a sanctuary. It was a secret passed from a ghost to a girl he had gambled everything on. Grief, sharp and sudden, pierced through the shock. I cried. I cried for the grandfather I never knew, for the years of loneliness I had endured, for the mother I barely remembered. I cried for the sheer, crushing weight of the choice he had left me. $50,000 and a new life, or a ledger that could destroy a criminal empire and almost certainly get me killed. He had called me brave. He had gambled on me. A girl who had spent her life being told she was a number, a case file, a problem to be managed. He saw something else. My gaze fell on the green lockbox. The crowbar was right beside it. There was no question of what I had to do next. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and picked up the heavy piece of iron. The metal was cold and solid in my hands. The barn was no longer just a building. It was a battleground. And my grandfather had just handed me the weapons. The lock on the green box was no match for the crowbar. With a screech of protesting metal, it popped open. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed foam, was a single, small, silver key. A locker key. It had a plastic tag with a number on it, 218. There was nothing else. No note, no explanation. Just the key. The first step on a path I wasn't sure I was ready to take. I sat back down on the crate, the key cold in my palm, the letter lying on the floor beside me. The flashlight beam was starting to dim. The darkness in the corners of the barn seemed to be creeping closer, filled with the weight of my grandfather's secrets and the enormity of the choice he had laid at my feet. $50,000. I tried to wrap my head around the number. It was a fortune. It was escape. I could be on a bus tomorrow, heading west, south, anywhere. I could rent an apartment, buy a car, get a degree. I could erase Ilara Vance, the foster kid, the forgotten granddaughter, and become someone new. Someone unburdened by a criminal family and their dark money. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, a clean slate. But it wouldn't be clean, would it? It would be a slate wiped clean with money my grandfather had set aside while his criminal enterprise continued to churn, to hurt people, to cast its long shadow. And my cousins, Marcus and Celia, would continue to run it. They would build their access road over this very spot. Their development project, funded by the same dirty money, and the cycle would continue. My freedom would be bought with my silence. And then there was the ledger, the other choice. Freedom through justice, he had called it. It sounded noble in the letter. Here, in the cold, dark barn, it sounded like a death sentence. I was an 18-year-old girl with a cardboard box to her name. They were a wealthy, powerful family with criminal connections. What chance would I have? I would hand the ledger to the police, and before the ink was dry on the report, their lawyers would have it buried under a mountain of legal challenges. Or worse, their partners wouldn't bother with lawyers. The wind howled outside, rattling a loose piece of metal on the roof. The sound was lonely, desolate. I felt a surge of anger at my grandfather for leaving me this impossible choice, at my cousins for being the people they were, at the world for being so relentlessly unfair. It was too much. The weight was too heavy. I thought about Frank at the general store, his simple, unquestioning kindness. I thought about Mr. Davies, the weary but decent lawyer. The world wasn't entirely made up of monsters. There were good people in it. But were there enough? And could I trust them? This is the point in the story where everything could have gone a different way. And maybe you've had a moment like this in your own life. A crossroads where the easy path is right there, shining and safe, and the hard path is dark and full of unknowns. It's a moment that defines you. If this is hitting you, if you've ever been at a crossroads like that, maybe drop a comment and tell us about it. You don't have to share details, just let us know you've been there, because I think a lot of us have, and it helps to know we're not alone in that struggle. For me, sitting there in the dark, I felt utterly alone. I curled up on the dusty floor, pulling my thin jacket around me, and I let the exhaustion and the fear wash over me. I didn't make a choice. I just gave in to the cold and the dark and fell into a restless, dream-filled sleep on the floor of my $10 barn. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through the cracks in the barn walls. My body ached from the cold, hard floor. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the smell of old hay and damp earth brought it all back. The letter, the key, the choice. In the light of a new day, the fear was still there, but it was joined by something else. A tiny, stubborn spark of resolve. My grandfather had believed in me. He had trusted me. He had called me brave. Maybe he was wrong. But what if he wasn't? I had spent my entire life being powerless, a pawn in a system I couldn't control. For the first time, I had power. It was terrifying, dangerous power, but it was power nonetheless. I could walk away, or I could fight. To walk away felt like a betrayal, not just of my grandfather's memory, but of myself. It felt like accepting the role they had always assigned me, the irrelevant, forgotten girl who didn't matter. I stood up, brushing the dust from my clothes. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't sure if it was the right choice, or the smart choice, but it was my choice. I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket. I pocketed the locker key. Then I walked out of the barn and into the crisp morning air, leaving the crowbar and the empty lockbox behind. I had a 4-hour bus ride back to the city. I had a ledger to retrieve. The trip back was the reverse of the day before, but I was a different person. The emptiness I had felt was replaced with a kind of nervous energy, a thrumming under my skin. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was driving straight toward it. When I got to the bus station, the place felt different. It was no longer a symbol of my loneliness, but a place of purpose. I found the bank of lockers. Number 218 was on the bottom row. The silver key slid in smoothly. I turned it and the metal door popped open. Inside was a simple, black leather briefcase. It was heavy. I lifted it out, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't open it. Not there. I tucked it under my arm, walked out of the station, and hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of Mr. Davies' small, unassuming law office. This wasn't a fight I could win alone. I was gambling again, just like my grandfather. I was gambling on the idea that a weary, small-time lawyer was a good man. Mr. Davies looked surprised to see me. He ushered me into his cluttered office, which smelled of old books and brewing coffee. "Elada, I didn't expect you back so soon," he said, gesturing for me to take the worn client chair opposite his desk. "Have you considered your cousin's offer?" "I have," I said, placing the briefcase on his desk with a heavy thud. "And I'm rejecting it." He raised an eyebrow. $10,000 is a significant sum for someone in your position, if you don't mind me saying so. "I know," I said. I took a deep breath. My grandfather left me more than just a barn. I told him everything. I pulled out the letter and let him read it. I watched his face as he scanned the page, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to shock, and then to a deep, troubled gravity. He read it twice, then set it down on his desk, his hands folded on top of it. He was silent for a long time. "I knew Alistair for 30 years, he said finally, his voice low. I knew he was carrying a heavy burden. I never knew what it was. I just knew it was killing him slowly." He looked at the briefcase. "You believe this is it? The ledger?" "I do," I said. He stared at me, his gaze intense. "Elara, you must understand what you are doing. If that ledger contains what your grandfather says it contains, you are declaring war on some very dangerous people. Your cousins are just the public face of it. The people behind them, they don't resolve disputes in court. My grandfather gave me a choice," I said, my own voice steady, surprising me with its strength. "To run and hide, or to fight. I've been running and hiding my whole life. I'm done with that." A slow smile spread across Mr. Davies' face. It transformed his weary features, making him look younger. "Alistair always did have an eye for character," he said. He tapped the briefcase. "May I?" I nodded. He carefully undid the latches and opened it. On top was a stack of $100 bills, neatly bundled. We didn't count it, but it looked like the $50,000 my grandfather had promised. And underneath it was a thick, leather-bound book. A ledger. Mr. Davies opened it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's same elegant script. Columns of dates, names, figures, and notes. It was dense, meticulous. It was a roadmap to a criminal underworld. "My God," he whispered, flipping through the pages. "He documented everything. This is a bomb." He closed the ledger and looked at me, his eyes shining with a new light. It wasn't just a professional light. It was the look of a man who has just been handed a cause. "All right, Elara Vance," he said, his voice firm. "You've rejected your cousin's offer. Now, let's make one of our own." The next few weeks were a blur of strategy and tension. Mr. Davies was a man transformed. He contacted a former colleague, someone he trusted at the U.S. Attorney's Office, a man who specialized in organized crime. We met in secret, in a nondescript office building downtown. I told my story again, and Mr. Davies presented the ledger. The federal agent, a man named Harris, was skeptical at first, but as he examined the ledger, his skepticism turned to intense focus. They placed me in protective custody in a small, anonymous apartment. For the first time in my life, I had a place with a real bed, a kitchen, a door I could lock. It was strange. I was a protected witness, a key to a massive criminal investigation, but in the quiet moments, I was just a girl learning how to live on her own. I used some of the $50,000, the clean money, my inheritance, to buy groceries, new clothes, a laptop. Simple things that felt like profound luxuries. The storm my grandfather predicted began to gather. The U.S. Attorney's Office convened a grand jury. Subpoenas were issued. The Vance family assets were frozen. The news broke, first as a whisper in the financial pages, then as a roar on the front pages. The story of the powerful Vance family, pillars of the community, being investigated for decades of money laundering and racketeering, was a sensation. My cousins, Marcus and Celia, were arrested. Their pictures were everywhere, their faces a mask of arrogant disbelief. They denied everything, of course. Their high-priced lawyers called the ledger a fabrication, the work of a senile old man and his delusional, greedy granddaughter. They tried to paint me as a disgruntled outcast, trying to extort the family. But the ledger was too detailed, too precise. It was a key, and with it, the investigators began to unlock every secret door my grandfather had built. They found corroborating evidence, offshore accounts, a trail of dirty money that led back 50 years. The Vance empire began to crumble. There were threats. Mr. Davies received them at his office. I received them through back channels. The partners my grandfather had warned me about were real, and they were angry. But we were protected. The federal government, once it has its teeth in something, does not let go easily. The legal battle raged for over a year. I had to testify before the grand jury. I walked into a room of stern-faced strangers and told them my story. I told them about the group home, about the bus station, about the $10 barn and the letter from my dead grandfather. I held up the ledger. I was terrified, my voice shaking, but I did it. I spoke the truth my grandfather never could. In the end, it was enough. Marcus and Celia, faced with a mountain of evidence, took a plea deal. They would serve time in a federal prison. Their sentences were lighter than they deserved, but their empire was gone. The Vance name was no longer a symbol of power, but of disgrace. The partners, the shadowy figures behind the scenes, scattered. Some were arrested, others simply vanished back into the underworld. The storm had passed. When it was all over, I was no longer in protective custody. I was just Ilara Vance. I was 20 years old. I had a substantial amount of money in a bank account, my grandfather's clean money, plus a significant witness reward from the government. I could have gone anywhere, done anything. But there was only one place I wanted to go. I took a bus back to Northwood. Frank was still behind the counter at the general store. He looked up when the bell chimed. "Heard you were busy," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Something like that," I said, smiling back. "I came to pay you for the flashlight." I bought the store's entire stock of coffee and donuts and took them over to the diner. I sat in a booth and talked to Martha, the owner. I told her I was staying. I told her I had plans for the old barn. The walk down the dirt track felt different this time. The woods weren't menacing, they were peaceful. When I came into the clearing, the barn was waiting for me, solid and patient. It hadn't changed. It was still a silent, gray giant. But I had changed. I had hired a local contractor to run power and water to the barn. I had plans drawn up to convert the vast space into a home and a workshop. I wanted to learn woodworking, to build things with my hands, to create something new and clean from the bones of the old. I unlocked the huge doors and swung them open. This time, they didn't groan. I'd had the hinges oiled. Sunlight streamed into the vast space, illuminating the dust motes that still danced in the air. But it wasn't the same darkness. It was a hopeful, promising emptiness. I walked over to the workbench where I had found the lockbox. My grandfather's letter was still in my wallet, worn and soft from being read so many times. I took it out and read the last lines again. "Whatever you decide, know that I loved your mother, and I loved you." He hadn't left me an inheritance of money or property. He had left me a legacy of choice. He had left me the truth. He had left me a home, not of brick and mortar, but of character. A place where I could stand my ground, a place where I could build a future of my own making. The barn wasn't a handout. It was a foundation. Standing there, in the quiet, sun-drenched barn, I finally understood. The real inheritance wasn't the money or the ledger. It was the chance to break the cycle. To take a name stained with crime and wash it clean with courage and hard work. To build a life not on what I was given, but on what I chose to become. This whole journey taught me that sometimes the things that look like burdens are actually gifts. They're tests of our strength, our resolve, our character. My grandfather's $10 barn looked like an insult, a final act of neglect. But it was the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. It was the key to my own life. And that's a lesson I want to share with all of you. If you're facing something that feels like an impossible burden, a challenge you don't think you can overcome, I want you to look closer. Maybe it's not just a burden. Maybe it's a foundation in disguise. Maybe it's the thing that will finally show you how strong you really are. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. This is a community for people who have been through things, for people who are fighting their own battles. Share your own stories of overcoming burdens in the comments below. I read them all, because every story matters, and every one of us deserves a place to build our foundation.